Elliot Dufresne had spent 46 years learning one thing that most people never figure out. The difference between what you build and what you own is almost never the same thing. He had constructed over 200 residential projects across the lower mainland of British Columbia, designed waterfront homes that appeared in architecture magazines, and raised a daughter who could identify load-bearing walls by the time she was 11. He had also trusted the woman he married with every blueprint of a life he had drawn with his own hands. That trust was his only miscalculation. On a Wednesday morning in late September, while the fog still clung to the mountains across Burrard Inlet and the kitchen smelled like the coffee he had brewed. 6 minutes earlier, his wife placed a manila folder beside his breakfast plate with the precision of someone who had rehearsed the gesture. Inside was a divorce petition, and beneath it, a typed list of demands so thorough it read less like a legal document and more like an inventory of everything he had ever worked for. She thought she was dismantling him. She had no idea she was handing him the one thing he had been waiting for. Before anything else, if you've ever spent years building something quietly while someone beside you spent those same years deciding they deserved to take it apart, this story was written for you. Stay with me. Vancouver in late September carries a particular kind of beauty that locals stop noticing and visitors never forget. The light off the water at the North Shore has a quality that photographers call soft and architects call honest. It does not flatter. It simply shows you what is there. At 6:48 in the morning, that light was moving through the floor-to-soiling windows of a house Elliot had designed himself on a sloped lot in West Vancouver. $4.2 million of Douglas fir, glass, and cantilever engineering perched above the water like a thought someone had decided to make permanent. He was seated at the kitchen island, reading glasses, dark Henley, a mug of black coffee beside a rolled set of construction drawings for a heritage restoration project in Gastown. He had a site meeting at 9. He liked to arrive early, walk the perimeter alone, listen to the way sound moved through a structure before the crew showed up and filled it with noise. It was a habit his colleagues found eccentric. It was the habit that had made him exceptional. His body had been less cooperative lately. The autoimmune condition, diagnosed 19 months earlier, had started as stiffness in his hands that he attributed to years of drafting and site work. By the time the rheumatologist gave it a name, the inflammation had settled into his joints with a persistence that made certain mornings feel like negotiations. He managed it. Medication at 6, again at noon, physiotherapy twice a week. His doctor had told him to reduce stress. His doctor had never met Celeste. Nadia was still asleep upstairs. 15 years old, quiet in the way that certain teenagers are quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they are still deciding how much of what they think is safe to share with the world. She played cello. She read novels that were too old for her and understood them anyway. She had her father's habit of noticing structural details, the way a doorframe was hung, the angle of a roofline, things most people walk past without registering. Elliot loved her with the kind of ferocity that never announces itself, the kind that simply shows up every morning in the form of a man who makes sure there is fresh coffee and a packed lunch and a house that feels safe to come home to. He heard footsteps on the hardwood, not Nadia's. Nadia moved through the house like weather. You felt her before you heard her. These footsteps were deliberate, measured, arriving with intention. Celeste appeared at the edge of the kitchen, 34 years old, the kind of compose that comes from preparation, not peace. She was dressed in workout clothes that cost more than most people's formal wear, her hair pulled into a low knot, her expression arranged into something she probably thought looked resolute. In the particular framework of attachment psychology, what she was displaying was not confidence. It was the performative certainty of someone who has already decided that the conversation they are about to initiate is a monologue. She set the folder down. Elliot, I want a divorce. He looked at the folder, then at her. He did not pick it up. I am taking the house. She crossed her arms. The Whistler property. The vehicle collection. 3.8 million in liquid assets. Her voice did not waver. She had practiced. I have already spoken with a lawyer. She paused, the kind of pause that is not a pause at all but a stage direction. Nadia stays with you. The kitchen went silent. Not the comfortable silence of a house at rest, but the dense, pressurized silence of a space that has just been fundamentally altered. From the hallway behind the staircase, there was a sound so small it could have been the house settling. It was not the house settling. Nadia was standing at the base of the stairs in an oversized sweatshirt, her school bag half slung over one shoulder, her face holding an expression that no 15-year-old should ever have to carry. She had heard everything. Celeste noticed her daughter the way you notice a detail in a room you have already decided to leave. A glance, brief, unencored. She is 15, Celeste said, speaking about Nadia while Nadia stood 7 meters away. She is moody, she is difficult. She needs structure I cannot provide right now. What Celeste meant, though she would never have framed it this way, was that Nadia did not fit the narrative she was constructing. In the curated version of her next life, the Instagram-ready reinvention she had been planning for months, a quiet, watchful teenager with a cello case and a habit of asking inconvenient questions, was not a supporting character she had cast. She pulled out her phone, already composing a post. Her thumb moved across the screen with the efficiency of someone who had been rehearsing her liberation for weeks. New chapter, finally choosing me. Nadia set her school bag down on the bottom step without a sound. She walked back upstairs. A door closed, not slammed. Closed with the careful control of someone who has just learned that restraint is sometimes the only form of dignity available to you. Elliot sat very still. His hands were flat on the counter. The inflammation in his right wrist pulsed in a way that his physiotherapist would have called a flare response. He breathed through it, not because he was calm, but because he had learned over 19 months of managing pain that reacting to it never changed its behavior. Only patience did. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand. He looked at the construction drawings beside his coffee, at the precise pencil lines he had drawn by hand, because he still believed that some things should be made by a human hand, even when a machine could do it faster. Then he picked up his mug, took a slow sip of coffee that had gone lukewarm, and looked out the window at the water. Something behind his eyes shifted. Not anger, not grief. Something older and more patient than either. The expression of a man who has just had a theory confirmed. If you found out that the person you had given your whole life to had been planning to dismantle it while you slept beside them, what would you do? Would you fight? Or would you let them believe they had already won? Drop one word in the comments. Fight or wait. Most people, when they are blindsided, react in ways that serve the person who blindsided them. They rage. They plead. They send long messages at 2 in the morning that become evidence. They perform their pain in ways that hand the other person exactly what was wanted. Proof that the damage landed. Proof of power. Elliot Dufresne did none of those things. By 10 o'clock that same morning, he was sitting across from Marguerite Sorel in her office on West Hastings Street. Marguerite was 61, silver-haired, and had spent 3 decades practicing family law in British Columbia with the quiet precision of someone who understood that the most important battles are won on paper. Long before anyone steps into a courtroom, she wore a navy blazer and no jewelry except a watch that had belonged to her mother. She had represented Elliot once before, years ago, in a zoning dispute that had gone to the Land Title and Survey Authority. She remembered him as the architect who brought his own sitemaps and never interrupted. He placed Celeste's petition on her desk without commentary. She read every page. Then she folded her hands, removed her glasses, and looked at him with the measured concern of someone who has seen this document, or versions of it, 400 times. She is requesting the primary residence, the Whistler Chalet, the vehicle collection, and 3.8 million in liquid holdings. That represents approximately 75% of your visible estate, Elliot. I know, and she is relinquishing custody of your daughter voluntarily. Yes, Marguerite studied him. Give her everything she has asked for. Marguerite did not move. Draft the agreement precisely as she has outlined it. Every asset, every property, every dollar. His voice was level, with one condition. Celeste must permanently and irrevocably surrender all parental rights and any future legal claim to Nadia. Full termination. No visitation. No reversal. Marguerite leaned back. You understand what you are proposing, completely. She watched him for a long moment, the way experienced lawyers watch clients who are either making the worst decision of their lives or the most calculated. She wants freedom, Elliot said quietly. So give her freedom, every square meter of it, and let her discover what it weighs. Marguerite uncapped her pen. She wrote it down. 4 weeks later, Celeste signed the separation agreement at a glass conference table downtown. She wore a cream-colored blazer, and the particular expression of someone who believes they have won something so thoroughly that gratitude is beneath them. She posted a photograph of herself outside the building before the elevator doors had fully closed. Unbound, unbothered, the future is mine. She tagged Brant Holloway, 29, a fitness coach she had been seeing for 9 months. Broad shoulders, narrow ambitions, and the instinct of a man who could sense the exact moment a situation stopped being profitable. In the photograph, he stood beside her with one arm around her waist and the relaxed confidence of someone who had never personally been responsible for building anything that required a foundation. They moved into the West Vancouver house that evening. Celeste redecorated within the first week. She replaced the handmade walnut dining table Elliot had built during Nadia's first year with a marble slab she ordered from a catalog. She had his draftings desk removed from the study and turned the room into a content creation space with ring lights and a branded backdrop. She changed the locks. Elliot and Nadia moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in East Vancouver. Clean lines, small balcony, a view of the port cranes if you leaned over the railing at the right angle. The ceilings were low. The heating was inconsistent. It was nothing like the house on the slope above the water. Nadia did not speak for the first 3 days. On the 4th evening, while Elliot was unpacking kitchen boxes with the methodical patience of a man who understands that every object needs a place, Nadia came out of her room carrying her cello case. She set it against the wall, sat down on the floor beside a stack of books that had not yet found a shelf, and looked at her father. You just let her take it. Her voice was not angry. It was worse than angry. It was confused. You built that house. You designed every room. You poured the foundation yourself, and you gave it away. A sharp flare moved through Elliot's wrist and up into his forearm, the kind that made his vision narrow for a moment. He set down the box he was holding, leaned against the counter, and waited for it to pass. Nadia moved toward him. He shook his head gently. I am all right, Dad. I am all right, Nadia. She stood there a moment longer. Then she picked up her cello case, went back to her room, and began playing something low and unfinished, a phrase she kept returning to without resolving. The notes moved through the thin apartment wall like a question that did not yet have an answer. Elliot understood her frustration. What developmental psychologists call a rupture of perceived safety. She had watched her mother leave without looking back, and her father give away everything without raising his voice. From her vantage, both acts looked like surrender. She could not yet see the difference between a man who has given up and a man who has given ground deliberately. There were things she did not know, things that were not safe to know until the structure around them was complete. Celeste, meanwhile, inhabited her new life with the enthusiasm of someone furnishing an identity rather than living one. She hosted a housewarming at the West Vancouver house in mid-October, catering from a Yaletown restaurant, a DJ, a step-and-repeat banner with her name in rose gold. She live-streamed the party to 18,000 followers. She had the logo she had commissioned, a stylized C with a crown above it, projected onto the living room wall. She sent Nadia a message that evening. A carefully worded, carefully timed text. "I miss you, sweetheart. Come visit whenever you are ready. I love you." Nadia never saw it. Each time a message arrived, Elliot read it carefully, then set his phone aside without forwarding it. He understood that a daughter deserves to know her mother is thinking of her. But he had also been in that kitchen on that September morning. He had watched Celeste glance at their daughter like a line item she had decided to write off. He was not going to let strategically timed affection undo the fragile ground Nadia was only just beginning to stand on. It was at a charity gala in Gastown, 3 months after the separation was finalized, that Elliot learned what this season would cost him personally. He had attended to support a colleague's affordable housing initiative. He was at the bar, waiting for a glass of water, when he heard Celeste's voice carrying across the room with the volume of someone who wants to be overheard. She was at a corner table with Brant and a circle of people Elliot recognized. Colleagues, former clients, people who had been guests in his home and eaten meals at the table he had built with his hands. She spotted him. Her gaze moved across his clothing, the simple gray blazer, the understated watch he had worn since the settlement, and something pleased moved through her expression, the micro-expression that psychologists identify as contempt, the most corrosive of the 4 indicators of relational destruction. She lifted her glass. "Elliot, still doing the humble architect thing?" She smiled at the table. "He gave me the house, you know, practically gift-wrapped it. I think he was relieved, honestly. Some men are just built to be walked over." Laughter. Not from everyone, but enough. Brant leaned back in his chair with the comfortable posture of a man sitting in someone else's life. Elliot stood still. His right hand tightened around the glass of water. The inflammation in his wrist responded immediately, a bright line of pain from his knuckles to his elbow. He noted every face at that table, every person who had laughed, every person who had looked away. Then he offered a brief nod, set the glass on the bar, and walked toward the exit. He did not need to stay. He had already seen what he came to see. What happens next on a Thursday evening 6 weeks later is the moment Celeste's carefully constructed world begins to come apart at the seams. And she never sees it coming. Stay with me. There is something most people never consider when they are celebrating the acquisition of a beautiful home. You can own every wall, every window, every hand-finished detail, every square centimeter of custom millwork. But if you do not own the ground beneath it, you are building your entire life on borrowed earth. And in British Columbia, where land title structures carry layers of history that most lawyers never bother to fully unpack, that distinction is not academic. It is foundational, literally. Celeste had been living in the West Vancouver house for 5 months when the doorbell rang on a Thursday evening in late February. She was midstream, ring lights on, backdrop arranged, 14,000 viewers watching her unbox a skincare partnership she had secured through her growing platform. She had just delivered the line she had been rehearsing, "This is what choosing yourself looks like," when the doorbell interrupted. She gestured to Brant, who was in the kitchen scrolling through his phone. He did not move. She went to the door herself, still broadcasting, the phone propped on its tripod with the lens capturing the entryway. The man on the porch wore a plain jacket and carried a clipboard. The expression on his face was the one perfected by people who serve legal documents for a living. Professional, entirely indifferent to context. "Celeste Dufresne?" "That is me. You have been served." She signed without reading. Reflects. Someone hands you a clipboard, you sign. He passed her the envelope and stepped back. She opened it in the doorway. 14,000 people watching, the fog from the inlet drifting in behind her. A notice of termination of ground lease, and below it, a detailed billing statement. $642,000. The line items were meticulous. Ground lease payments at $53,500 per month, compounding from the date the property transferred into her sole ownership. escalating property tax obligations attached to the land title, administrative fees, accrued interest. Celeste stared at the number. Then she did exactly what a person with an audience does when the ground shifts beneath them. She performed. She turned to the camera with a laugh that was pitched slightly too high to be real. My ex-husband just had papers served to my door. While I am live, she held up the documents. He is trying to intimidate me. This is what insecure men do when they cannot handle a woman winning. She tore the papers in half. The chat flooded with fire emojis and supportive messages. She tossed the pieces onto the console table and returned to her unboxing. Brandt appeared in the hallway a few minutes later. He was not laughing. He had the expression of a man performing a calculation he did not enjoy the result of. That looked real, Celeste. It is a scare tactic. Ground leases are not scare tactics. I will call my lawyer in the morning. Call her now, I said in the morning. She reached up and touched his jaw, the redirect she had used 100 times. The gesture that said, I am in control, which psychologists recognize as a form of anxious reassurance-seeking disguised as confidence. Brandt nodded slowly, but his eyes moved to the torn documents on the console table, and something behind his expression had already shifted. 312 meters down the slope, in the parking area beside the seawall path, Elliot sat in his truck. The window was down. February air off, Bird Inlet, sharp and salt-heavy, moved through the cab. He could see the glow of his old house against the dark hillside. Her house now, by every document that mattered at surface level. Every window blazing. He sat with a bottle of water, his evening medication, and the quiet that had become the most honest relationship in his life over the past year. His wrist ached. It always ached more in the cold. He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel and waited for the flare to settle into its familiar background presence. On the passenger seat was a single folder. Inside it, a copy of a land trust document executed 16 years earlier, before Celeste was anything more than a woman he had met at a design exhibition in Kitsilano. A document drafted by Philippe Hebert, one of the most meticulous real estate trustees in British Columbia, and one of the only people Elliot trusted with the structural details of his life. The house, the $4.2 million of Douglas fir and glass and cantilever engineering, belonged to Celeste. The land beneath it had never belonged to anyone but the trust, the Nadia Dufresne Future Trust, named for a daughter who had not yet been born, whose future Elliot had already decided to protect. He had tried to explain this to Celeste once, early in their marriage. The difference between what is visible and what is structural. She had told him he sounded like a professor nobody asked for. He remembered that now, sitting in the dark with the salt air and the pain in his wrist, watching the lights of a house he had designed with his own hands blaze against the mountain. He was not smiling, but something in his expression had the quality of a man watching the final piece of a very long project slide into position. He started the truck and drove home through the rain. Celeste did not call her lawyer that night. She called at 9:15 the following morning. By then, the filing had already been timestamped in the court's scheduling system. When Celeste walks into that courtroom believing she still holds every advantage, what happens next will redefine everything she thought she understood about what she took. Keep listening. There is a particular silence that fills a courtroom in the seconds before a ruling changes everything. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It is simply the collective stillness of a room full of professionals who have simultaneously sensed that the architecture of the case they walked in with is about to be structurally compromised. Celeste's attorney had felt that silence 4 times in 28 years of practice. She felt it now, and she had already begun to rearrange her notes. Celeste had filed the motion herself against her attorney's quiet recommendation. The filing accused Elliot of harassment and financial intimidation. The language was polished, but the substance was thin. She wanted the ground lease claim dismissed. She wanted the court to affirm, clearly and permanently, that the house was hers, She arrived at the courthouse in a tailored black coat and heeled boots, Brandt beside her, her attorney one step behind. She stopped in the lobby to take a photograph with a woman who recognized her from social media. She posted it before she reached the courtroom doors. Accountability era. Nobody takes what is mine. Inside, Elliot was already seated. Navy suit she had never seen. Clean, understated. The particular composure of a man who has nothing left to prove and everything left to protect. Marguerite Sorel sat beside him, her reading glasses on their chain, her face revealing nothing. Celeste settled into her chair, set her bag on the table, and looked across at Elliot with the certainty of a person who has never once been wrong about their own position. He was not looking at her. He was watching the door. Philippe Hebert entered the courtroom at 9:57. 64 years old, unhurried, the posture of a man who had spent 4 decades being the most thoroughly prepared person in every proceeding he entered. He carried a leather portfolio, wore a watch that did not need to impress anyone, and took a seat in the gallery without acknowledging a single person in the room. Celeste glanced at him, did not recognize him, returned to her phone. The hearing began. Celeste's attorney presented the argument with professional efficiency. The divorce agreement was final. The property transfer was recorded. The ground lease claim was a transparent attempt to destabilize a rightful owner. She used phrases like settled instrument and clear title and legal finality. She was competent. She was thorough. The judge listened, asked one clarifying question, and made a note. Then he looked at Marguerite Sorel. Marguerite opened the leather portfolio and placed the first document on the table with the unhurried precision of a person who already knows where the final page leads. Your Honor, I am introducing the original title structure and trust instrument for the property in question. Specifically, the Nadia Dufresne Future Trust, established 16 years ago, prior to the marriage. Celeste's attorney stopped writing. Marguerite continued. The residential structure was conveyed to Ms. Dufresne as part of the separation agreement. That transfer is valid and entirely unchallenged. A pause. Surgical. However, the land on which the structure sits has been held in irrevocable trust since the property was originally acquired. It was never part of the marital estate. It was never subject to equitable distribution under the Family Law Act, and it was therefore never legally available for inclusion in the separation agreement. She set the document down. Ms. Dufresne owns the house. She has never owned the ground beneath it. The room went still. Not the theatrical stillness of a film, the real stillness, the kind that settles over a space when trained professionals register simultaneously that the foundation of their case has just been removed. The judge reviewed the documents. 1 page. 2, 3. He took the time that judges take when the answer has become clear but must be arrived at correctly. 40 seconds of absolute silence. He removed his glasses. The trust instrument is properly executed and legally valid under British Columbia law. Ms. Dufresne, you may legally own the residential structure on this property. However, you do not own and have not owned the land on which it stands. The ground lease obligations are valid, outstanding, and enforceable. He glanced at the clerk. Please read the outstanding balance into the record. The clerk read it clearly. $642,000. Celeste did not speak. The color left her face in a way that had nothing to do with composure and everything to do with the sudden, irreversible recognition that the ground she had been standing on, literally, architecturally, and in every metaphorical sense available, had never been hers. Her attorney placed a hand on her arm. Celeste's breathing had changed. She gripped the edge of the table with both hands, and for a moment the room held itself in the professional, contained concern of people managing a person who has just had the structural floor removed from beneath her understanding of her own life. Water was brought. Her attorney leaned close and spoke quietly. In the gallery, Brandt Holloway was standing. He had been seated 3 rows back. He did not rush forward. He did not call her name. He stood there for a count of several seconds, long enough for everyone paying attention to register exactly what they were witnessing. Then he straightened his jacket and spoke in a tone that carried just far enough. "This is not a situation I am in a position to be part of." He stepped past the two people in his row, walked to the aisle without hurrying, and pushed through the courtroom doors. They swung shut behind him with a mechanical click that in the silence sounded like punctuation at the end of a very long sentence. What psychologists call an avoidant attachment rupture. The partner who was never emotionally invested reveals that absence at the precise moment investment is required. It is not cruelty, exactly. It is clarity. The sudden, unwelcome clarity of discovering that the person beside you was only ever beside you conditionally. Celeste was helped back to composure by her attorney. The curated confidence, the ring lights and the branded backdrops and the liberation hashtags, all of it was simply gone. Not cracked, structurally removed. She looked up, not at her attorney, not at the judge, not at the empty seat where Brandt had been. She looked at Elliot. He was already rising from his chair, collecting his portfolio, exchanging a quiet word with Marguerite. He had the bearing of a man with somewhere to be, and the full intention of arriving there with his dignity intact. He did not look at her. That was the part that reached her most deeply. Not the debt, not the empty gallery seat, not the clerk's voice reading $642,000 into the record. The fact that Elliot Dufresne, the man she had glanced past on a September morning while composing a social media post about freedom, did not find her worth a single final look. What happens in the courthouse corridor when Celeste catches Elliot before the elevator is the moment this story arrives at its real center. Keep listening. The corridor smelled like floor cleaner and recirculated air, the particular institutional scent of every building where consequential things are decided, where people walk in holding one version of their life and walk out carrying something entirely different. Elliot was nearly to the elevator when he heard his name, not called, whispered, which is always worse, the sound of a person whose voice has lost its architecture. He turned. Celeste was in the hallway. Her attorney stood several steps behind her near the courtroom doors, giving the moment the professional distance of someone who knows when to step back. The tailored black coat that had looked so deliberate 3 hours earlier now appeared only like a costume from a role she could no longer play. She pressed one hand flat against the wall. "Elliot, I was wrong. About everything." Her voice was barely sound. "Please, let me stay in the house. I will manage the lease. I will sell things. I just need time." He stood still and looked at her, not with cruelty, not with satisfaction. What was in his face was quieter than either of those. The settled, permanent grief of a man who had loved someone for a long time and had spent an even longer time coming to terms with who that person actually was. "You took everything you thought had value." His voice was low and even. "The house, the cars, the accounts. You took them because you believed that was the architecture." He paused. "But the one thing that actually mattered to me, my daughter, you walked away from her without turning around." She opened her mouth. "You said it in front of her, Celeste." His jaw tightened once. "That she was difficult, that she did not fit your life. You said it while she was standing 7 meters away, wearing her school bag, and you did not even lower your voice." He looked at her steadily. "That is the one structural failure I cannot repair." He pressed the elevator button. "I hope you find what you are looking for." He meant it. Not kindly, not unkindly. Simply honestly. The way you say something when you have arrived at the end of a very long calculation and the answer is final. The elevator opened. He stepped in. The doors closed. Nadia was in the lobby. Elliot had told her not to come. She had been sitting in the passenger seat of the truck that morning when he walked out of the apartment, headphones around her neck, cello case wedged behind the seat, looking straight ahead with the wordless determination that teenagers reserve for decisions that have already been made and are no longer open for discussion. She was sitting in a lobby chair with a music theory workbook open in her lap. She looked up the moment the elevator doors opened. There was a pause, a held breath. Then Nadia stood, crossed the lobby, and put her arms around her father. Not a brief hug. The kind that recalibrates something fundamental. The kind that says, I understand now what I did not understand before, and I am sorry it took me this long. Elliot brought his hand to the back of her head. Steady, quiet, present in the way he had always been present, even through the months when Nadia had refused to see it. I did not understand what you were doing, she said into his shoulder. Her voice was thick. I thought you gave up. But you were building something the whole time. He pulled back enough to look at her. Some structures take longer to reveal themselves. They walked out of the courthouse together into the late February afternoon. Low gray sky, air that tasted like rain and cedar. The whole city moving at its unhurried West Coast pace, entirely unaware that something important had just been restored between a father and his daughter. The rest unfolded over the following weeks with the quiet momentum of something that had been engineered correctly from the beginning. Through the Nadia Dufresne Future Trust, the instrument Philippe Hébert had drafted 16 years earlier, Nadia acquired the West Vancouver property at a legally structured price of $780,000. The house her mother had redecorated, live-streamed, and celebrated as proof of everything she had won now belonged to her 15-year-old daughter. Celeste's financial situation disassembled itself with the methodical inevitability of a structure built without adequate support. The vehicle collection was liquidated first. The jewelry followed. What remained of her liquid assets after legal fees was not enough to sustain the identity she had constructed. She moved out of a hotel she could no longer afford. Friends became unavailable. The social media audience, which had been her platform and her proof, reflected her changed circumstances back to her with the particular cruelty of an audience that only ever loved the version of you that was winning. Brant Holloway posted a photograph of himself at a resort in Tofino 3 days after the hearing. Alone, no caption, no tag. The silence said everything a caption would have made complicated. Celeste reached out to Nadia once, on a quiet evening in early March. Nadia was at her father's apartment, working on a composition she was considering submitting to a summer program at the Royal Conservatory in Toronto. When her mother's name appeared on her phone, she sat with it for a moment. Not in anger, not in bitterness. In the careful, measured consideration of someone who has decided she is old enough to choose how she responds to the people who have hurt her, she answered. Celeste's voice came through unsteady. I love you. I made mistakes. I am sorry, please. Nadia listened to every word, completely, without interrupting. When the silence had settled, Nadia spoke. Calm, clear, final. Mom, you chose your freedom. I am choosing mine. She ended the call, set her phone beside her sheet music, picked up her pencil, and returned to the composition she had been working on. A piece for solo cello that she had titled, in small handwriting in the upper corner of the manuscript paper, Foundation. Some evenings settle differently. There is no particular reason, nothing dramatic on the horizon. The light coming through the apartment windows is the same light it always is around 5:30 in late winter Vancouver, gray softening, getting ready to give way to that specific shade of blue that drifts in off the inlet at dusk. The baseboard heater clicks the way it always clicks. The refrigerator hums. But something in the air is lighter, as though a load-bearing weight you had been compensating for so long you forgot it was there has been quietly, carefully removed. That was the evening Elliot ordered sushi from the place on Commercial Drive. 2 salmon rolls, 1 spicy tuna, a side of edamame, because Nadia had been on a keep-it-simple phase for 3 weeks, and he had learned to stop questioning her food philosophies. They ate at the kitchen counter because neither of them had gotten around to clearing the drafting paper off the table. This was their life now. Modest apartment, counter dinners, a balcony that caught the evening breeze off the port, and a hallway light that flickered every time someone in the building above them ran the washing machine. It was not $4.2 million of Douglas fir and cantilevered glass. It was better. Nadia was telling him about the composition. The cello piece had started as a school assignment and grown into something she was thinking about submitting to a summer program. She was talking the way she always talked about music, quickly, with her hands moving, her eyes carrying that particular living light that enters a person when they are describe a thing they were put on this earth to do. Elliot was listening the way he listened to everything, fully, without performing it, the way people who have survived something real learn to be present in ordinary moments, because they understand at actual cost that ordinary moments are what a life is built from. He reached for his water glass and shifted, just slightly, as the familiar ache moved through his wrist and up his forearm. Nadia stopped mid-sentence. She always noticed now. "Dad." The word landed between them gently. "Are you okay?" Her voice was careful of someone who has decided they are old enough to ask the real question. "Not fine. Actually okay." A breath, a pause. Elliot set down his glass, folded his hands on the counter, and for the first time in over a year he answered honestly. "I am better than I have been in a long time, and I mean that." He looked at her. "The condition is being managed properly now, not pushed through in silence. My rheumatologist is cautiously optimistic. No more secrets between us." Nadia was quiet for a moment. "How long did you know?" "Before everything happened. 19 months before she filed. I had the diagnosis before I walked into Marguerite's office. Before I signed anything." He nodded slowly. "I put the entire plan together while I was managing the inflammation, Nadia. Because illness has a way of clarifying what is structural and what is decorative, what will hold weight and what will not." He looked at her steadily. "You were the only thing on the structural list." The baseboard heater clicked. The refrigerator held its low note. Outside, a container ship moved through the inlet, its lights reflected in the dark water like a slow-moving constellation. Nadia picked up her can of ginger ale. She held it out. "To a solid foundation," she said. Elliot picked up his water glass. They clinked. It was, without question, the best meal either of them had eaten in a very long time. Later, after the containers were in the recycling, and Nadia had gone to her room with her manuscript paper and her pencil, and the apartment had settled into its nighttime sounds, Elliot stood at the balcony door. The Vancouver evening had gone to that specific blue dark that belongs to the coast. The mountains across the inlet were visible only as absence, darker shapes against a dark sky. The port cranes stood lit and motionless. A float plane crossed low over the water, its navigation lights steady. He thought about the path that had led here, the folder on the breakfast plate, the gala and the faces he had noted, the courtroom and the hallway and the elevator doors closing, the walk out into the February afternoon with his daughter beside him. He had spent his life designing structures. It was what he knew and what he loved. You find a piece of ground that other people have overlooked. You study it. You understand its load capacity, its drainage, its orientation to the light. And then you build something on it that will stand long after you are gone. Something your children will live in. Something that will shelter the people who come after you from the weather they have not yet encountered. That was legacy, not the houses, not the vehicles, not the numbers in an account, the foundation. He turned back toward the apartment, toward the light under his daughter's door, where the faint, steady sound of a pencil on manuscript paper meant Nadia was still composing, still building, still becoming. Celeste had believed she was taking everything. She had taken the visible structure, the surface, the part that photographs well and impresses strangers. She had left behind the land, the trust, the daughter, the father who would not fold. She had left behind the only things that were load-bearing. Elliot turned off the balcony light and went inside. This story carries 3 things worth remembering. Not on a sticky note you will lose behind the fridge, but in the small notebook in the kitchen drawer, the one beside the spare batteries and the takeout menus. First, document what is structurally yours. Elliot protected his daughter not with anger but with a 16-year-old piece of paper. If you have property, a family asset, or a savings account you built on your own, call your lawyer or your provincial land title office this week and ask one question. Is this titled the way I intend? One phone call, 30 minutes. That is how legacy is protected in real life. Second, a person who dismisses your dignity in front of an audience has already told you exactly who they are. The gala crowd laughed. Elliot noted their faces and walked out. You do not owe continued trust to anyone who performs at your expense. That includes family. Third, the most valuable thing you can leave a child is not money. It is the memory of watching you refuse to collapse under pressure. Your grandchildren are watching how you carry difficult seasons right now. The composure you show when the structure is shaking is the lesson they carry at 40, at 60, long after the details of this story have faded. Life is not always fair, but a real parent turns life's unfairness into a foundation their child can stand on. Celeste took everything she believed mattered. She left behind the only things that did. What will Elliot do next? The real design, the one Celeste still does not know she is living inside, is only beginning to reveal itself. And this time he will not be building in silence. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And stay close, because the next chapter of Elliot and Nadia's story is coming.